How's it going, everyone? Welcome, Elvira Gonzalez here, and today let's go to now talk about is the rendering logic, which is part of the model from Josh Kamiwa as a way to understand now deeply is in Java, CSS, uh, as JavaScript developers. So on the first model we went through describing is the fundamentals of the CSS. So for example, how you can now add a class. So what is CSS? How you can now add styles with this external, internal, or inline, and how you can now select elements into the DOM. So you can is now, uh, for example, based on its state known as pseudo classes, or based on a particularly elements, now pseudo elements, you can now select is several of these elements, one or multiple elements, to apply these CSS rules, right? So via it is combinator, so combine selectors, or just single is cherry picking multiple of them, or a single one. So another is the basis of the functions that we have in the language, which is part of the which is another part of the anatomy of the CSS. Like, hey, we have here is the CSS functions, for example, and as which is, hey, I can use is the call. I can use now is the for example, to compute is the color, all right, whether it's an RGB or HSL, or I can now use some other functions that are available, right? And some of the rules that CSS has to indicate how it's going to behave. So, for example, like media query, and layer, view transition, and so on and so forth. And also is the and also is the shorthand properties, and last but not least is the comment. So in that model, in the model one, and I just want to make a quick recap of that. We went through, look at what are the things. So what is the anatomy of the CSS? What are the part of the CSS anatomy, especially the rules? We look at what is the rules, what are the most common rules, add rules that we can use, especially here in 2025 in CSS, okay? Which is the media query, as well as the selectors. What are the most useful selectors still, despite that all of this tooling that we can have, such as the CSS tooling, such as hover, focus, first and last end type, or last end child, right? And why, for example, focus is still relevant, especially if you want to provide now functionality and accessibility to your applications, and how we actually here through a series of practice, and especially on React, how we actually now have the practical idea of why we use, for example, certain components in the case of React, okay, to provide now these assistive technologies a way for them to talk, or to describe what is going on, right? Because still these area labels that we have in the language, they are not sufficient. In some browsers, there's not still there is not a wide support on using these area labels, for example. So that's why we have to rely on this kind of stuff. So focus is one of these features, and this is why we also explore about the web content accessibility guidelines, which is the web CAG, which is this, so web content accessibility guidelines, the WCAG CAG, okay, which provide now is some principles of how you can make your applications accessible. So it must be perceivable, it must be operable, it must be understandable and robust. So this is the principle where now the accessibility guideline sits on top of that, right? And you can here read now is what are the several of this accessibility proposals you can use, for example, to provide is your content be ready to be read by this screen reader, for example, or any other assistive technologies. So we also look about the uh, pseudo elements, the units, the possible units that we can have, the colors, the different formats of colors, as well as the typography, the font family, what are the several type of fonts that we can have, whether it's serif or sans serif, and why we mention this web font, which is the way of how you can provide now a personalized experience. For example, something that Airbnb and Google and Facebook now they have their own particular fonts to indicate that hey, this is our brand. Okay, so how can we use those fonts, and what are the different variants of these forms or these formats, font formats, all right? Whether it's strong or bold or italic, and what each one of them describe, right? And also the way of how you can now split the text, text spacing, or line spacing, the text margin or the text position, as well as the text formations, which is the uppercase, the lowercase, so on and so forth. So this is just the basics, all right, that we need to know right now and have a hands-on experience before actually getting to this and understand this particular model. So this model one, render logic, is talking about is how this mechanisms works, and because now browsers they have is this built-in style sheets known as user style sheet agent, which describe how all of these elements will look like, HTML elements, okay? Because there were no consistency across how all of these elements should look like in different browsers. This is why we have things like CSS resets to actually have a one blank state of how all of these elements should look like, all right? But because now browsers have stick to the WebWC standards, this nuance and variations actually now has been more consistent. So what happened is that now browsers follow and provide these consistent elements that we have on the browsers, but it turns out that there's still some missing properties in that. So for example, is some of them are related to how the input will look like, how the width is calculated, all right? And because since this is known as this inheritance, all right, which is how you can now receive some values from pattern components or from pattern HTML elements. So this particular mechanism that we can benefit from usually is in text transformations. So for example, like color or text shadow, text transform. We can also force that inheritance by being explicit about this. And this inheritance, which is known as the CSS rule or the CSS cascade, model is a way how now different CSS declarations or CSS rules, competing CSS rules now are applied into the final documents. So because now we have is this different phases or different part of the cascade that is being applied. The first is the importance. So for example, transitions and animations, as well as the import, actually, if one particular declaration we have that, well, is going to be applied in favor of another one. The next one is the user agent, which say, hey, who is the author of this CSS? Is the user, or is the application, or is the browser, right? And then we have now from the specificity. So this specificity now follows as well-defined rules, which is, hey, if this is by ID, I'm going to apply this first. Anytime that I mention any of these topics, the further it goes, the less likely are to be applied in the final DOM, right? So for example, hey, if this is now a selector by ID, it has a more priority. But if you use, for example, a class or a pseudo elements or a pseudo, sorry, if you use a class or a pseudo class, it follow into this. If this selector is, for example, a pseudo, how do you call it? A pseudo element, all right? So now it falls into this category. And last but not least is the order here, the location in which this CSS rule is. So if the CSS rule now are on the top, and then somehow is overridden for any of these properties that I mentioned before, so it won't now appear on the final DOM. So only, okay, not only, but those CSS styles that happens in the last of the documents are more likely to be is apply. Whereas if you put that on the top, it's less likely to be applied. So this is just to describe as a cascade, right? And when it comes, this is just to understand that this is what the CSS actually stands for. And when it comes to understanding is the flows of this text or this content that is going to be read traditionally, because from the paper industry, or from the how do you call it? From the print media, from the print industry, okay? Traditionally, which was originated back then in some place in French in the Middle Age, where now Gutenberg actually created this print device, right? Because it was designed back then for that specific case. The idea is that it follow is this inline and block directions, where the inline described is the sequence of characters, which is indicating is the flow in which we read that content. And as we group all of these different words into paragraph, we display that in a block, right? So the block directions. So because this is position or geographically is based on location, right? And when the web was designed, was it doesn't have any intentions to actually show the contents in different formats, all right? So what we have, for example, is margin, which is something that we're going to talk about that later here. But this is what we have, for example, is the margin and the padding and the border that follows these directions. So what happens is when you want to show content that doesn't follow this location-based content, right? It follows now a logical based flow of content known as the logical properties, all right? Which is, for example, in the Arabic, where they read now from right to left, or from the hand space characters when they read from top to down, and then move to the next one, top to down, then move to the next one, and so on and so forth. Okay? So on these particular cases, right? This is what it makes sense, and this is why they made the sales pitch of the logical directions. Instead of using now the margin and the padding and the bottom, as we know, we are now going to use this using is the inline or block to understand and to identify how this content is going to be rendered. And not only that, it's going to apply some padding, border, or margin. Okay? So all of these particular properties, which is the reason, which is why it is made now a CSX box model, which is the way of how now CSS treat each one of those HTML elements via this box that has is the margin, it has the border, it has the padding, and as well as the content. So each one of those places described is several layers that can apply around your content. So you can think of this like going out into a winter walk, and you of course put now several layers on that. So you have is your body, which is the content, right, that you want to preserve. The padding is the material of the coat, all right, that fluffy coat that you might have, right. The border is the the exterior material of which this coat is made of, right, usually polyester, crayon. I don't think they should be used crayon for that, but polyester, because crayon is way much more inflammable than polyester. But in any case, and then you have now is the margin, which allegedly you must have is a 2 meter space, all right, to be safe from another person. And if you are in a combat, that makes a lot of sense because you want us to be away from those threats to you, right? So this is this particular analogy when it comes to understanding now what the CSS is, the CSS box model, and how we can actually look from the JavaScript perspective, all right, where now the box model, all right, is like that. So when somebody asks you and tells you is like, what is the box model in CSS? And I do find that this is, man, you need to understand this. You definitely need to understand, or you will understand that. You will understand that if you're going to dedicate time to this kind of stuff. So the box model is that. So is the way how now CSS see the content or see this HTML elements as a box where now it is made of different layers around the content. And because now, as I mentioned earlier, that the browser have its own user style sheets, when it comes to compute now the width of this different boxes, you have now two alternatives. So one of them is with the content, but now, luckily for us, which is much more intuitive, is with the border, including is the border, right? So the width now not only is the content, but also is the padding as well as the border. So it makes much more sense when it comes to actually calculate is the width of an element. And for that, you need to describe to the CSS as part of the CSS reset You say, hey, you know what? The box sizing here will be is now the border box. So this box model, all right, which is made of these different layers. It's made of a padding, it's made of a border, and it's made of a margin, all right? And so the padding is what is exterior of the content, which is what is the inner space, okay? And how can we now use is the different units in padding, all right? We can use this pixel, m, and root m. Also percentage is not widely used because now the percentage is going to be affected by the width of that element. This is one of the reasons we don't use this because the percentage are always calculated based on the elements available with, right? So this might is disturb your particular content. So, but in other words, we use this kind of units, so pixels, m, and root m, and so on and so forth. And when it comes to look now at the shorthand properties here, okay, which is what we use in padding, we have now different ways to represent that. Okay, so it follows now this clockwise from top, right, bottom, and left. And now we can is not only override the values, okay, which is, hey, indicating is that if you have no similar values in that top and left or right and left direction, okay, you can also is now override those values here by putting is that in this another way. So not only this, but also we look at how can we use this the padding not for the location properties, but also for the logical properties. And again, I'm not that quite familiar with, but if you want to use this, we're starting to say padding inline star. So you say padding inline star, and let's you know what? Let's me put that a test here. So for example, here we're gonna overwrite this. Come on. I do want to override this. Okay, it has some padding here, but I want to now add some content. You say padding inline, which is following is how this text is going to be read. Okay, inline star, and then I can say is, well, 50 pixels, you know. We can increase that, you know, how this text is gonna do that. And the same is for the inline n. You say, hey, put that away. And the same is for the block, right? When you say now, this will be is part of the block. Is what is the block n, and that is, well, at the top. It's gonna add that, or is this padding block is will be on the star. Okay, and it's gonna padding block here on the star, and then you add that content, add that padding here. So all of this is just to starting to use this logical CSS or logical box model properties. Okay, good. Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. This is for padding. For border, the story is a little bit different because we can here now is specify is not only the width of this, but also is the style, which is the how we're going to define is the border, as well as the color of this. So this is the particular format in which we're going to define is this. And since this, all right, you can say is, hey, border, you can say border, simple like that, all right. And then define is the unit, exactly define is the pixel, the width, define is the color, which is black. I mean is solid, and then you define is a color like this, right? And then you draw is this. So now the browser actually draw this nice little border from that. So okay, so far so good, right? So far so good. By default, if you don't specify is the color of that, it will now apply that as a black. Well, in this case, it's just inherit that, as you can see here. But the only property that is required here is the style, right? This is the only property that is required here, is the style. And then it's going to autocomplete is that with the default property is how this border will look like, as well as the color here. Well, in this case, it's now inherit that color, so you can guess, right? And when it comes to now provide some radius to this border, all right, or the border radius, we can do is following is the same name convention. We say border inline star, border inline star, border radius inline star. Okay, and then you can say is, where are we? We are here, right? Exactly. And the thing is this. Yeah, where are we? Oh, it's this one. So it's this one. So we are now saying, hey, I want to do this like 50%, right? Border radius inline star. It seems that doesn't work. Border radius. You can put it that way. It doesn't have any direction here. Can you specify that? I don't think so. Exactly. It's like, oh, this is different. Border top. But this doesn't follow is that, border top. Oh, border star, border inline. Oh, okay. But this is for the inline end style. Okay. But when it comes to, this is part of the block. All right. But if you want to provide is a radius, it say no, it's not like that. It is like this. Okay, makes a lot of sense. So you can see we're applying is that to that element. What was the element? Well, in any case, doesn't matter. What about this? You can say is that. So border radius to all of the element as 50%. 50%. Right. So I want to apply is this, and somehow it doesn't apply that because it must be like this. Because this is position absolute, and this is following is the normal radius. Okay. And here, as you can see, border, exactly. So border radius is now 50%, and then you get right. This is how you can apply these particular elements here. Or this is, so you get the idea, right? So you get the idea, and this will be for all of this. So it only renders, as you can see, it only renders to all of these elements. Only that part of the elements are rendered. And this is true because when I do this, it's only rendering is that part. It's only updated only those subset of elements and not the other ones, right? As you can see, only that specific You see, it's only updating is that specific element in there. That's what happened. So it is only updating this small set of. This is part of the React. But again, I find that out. This is quite revealing, also. So this is now border, all right? And then we talk about is border versus outline. So outline and border, in some respect, they're quite similar, but they both add visual edge to a given element. The core difference is that outline doesn't affect layout. Outline is kind of more like a box shadow, like this. So outline is kind of more like a box shadow. It is a cosmetic effect drap over an element without nudging it around or changing its size. But outline doesn't affect the layout. Outline is kind of more like a box shadow. It is a cosmetic effect drap over an element. So outlines share many of the same property, like this, but it's like a decoration. It's a cosmetic effect. A couple more quick tidbits are about outline. This wasn't the case, but it has been this way all major yeah, but it has been this way across all major browsers since 2023. Outline have a special outline offset properties. Outline will follow the curve with border radius in all modern browsers. This wasn't this wasn't always the case, but it has been this way across all major browsers since 2023. And outline has a special outline offset property. It allows you to add a bit of a gap between the element and its outline. Mm-hmm. So, but again, outline here, for example, if I say here, the outline property behaves similar like this. You say, hey, outline, okay, behaves similar like the border, which is, hey, I need to pass it I need to pass it the outline with the color, says Seru, um, chocolate, or cerulean. No, doesn't exist. All right. Really? Interesting. Well, it doesn't matter. Chocolate. Chocolate, right? It's chocolate. So 3 picks of chocolate and I guess this no is the line style or the style width, which is, hey, this will be now a line. This will be now a, for example, solid. All right. And then this will be now is, let's say, light blue, right? But again, this is quite different, all right? Because this doesn't affect the layout. So this doesn't affect the layout. Interesting. So this doesn't affect the layout. And when you mean, what do you mean by it doesn't affect the layout? So, okay. What do you mean by doesn't affect the layout? Okay. So the core difference is that this is a good question. What does it? In fact, let me do this. Let me in fact now here use this particularly tool of cloud, right,
tackle the reasoning.
which is the prompt structure. And then you get is this. This is the test context, tone context, background data, documents and image. Here's a career guidance document you should reference when answering the user guide document. Detailed task descriptions and rules. Here's an important rule for the interaction. Always state in the character as Joe, an AI from a drastic career. If you are unsure how to respond, say sorry. I didn't understand that. Could you repeat the question? If someone asks, okay, but this is from the engineer. If someone asks something irrelevant, say sorry, I'm Joe, and I give you the career advice. Do you have a career question today? Detailed task descriptions and rule. And an example here. Here is an example of how to respond in a standard interaction. User, hi, how were you create and what do you do? Joe, hello. How were you created and what do you do? Hello, my name is Joe and I was created by Astra Career to give you career advice. What can I help you with you today? Conversation and history. Here is a conversation history between the user and you. Prior to the question, it could be empty. If there is no history, then you pass the history. And then how you populate all of that. Mm-hmm. But again, this particularly prompt structure. Prompt structure. 1 or 2 sentences to establish role and high-level task. And dynamic retrieve content and detailed task instruction. Example and shot optionals. And repeat critical instructions, particularly useful for very long prompt. Mm-hmm. So, in other words, in 1 or 2 sentences to establish the role and the high-level description. So, I'm going to provide you now this, all right? And then you say, hey, you are an AI travel agent. Establish 1 and 2 role in the high-level description. It's like the role you are in the role. You know the role. Right? You are in with creating a personal travel itinerary based on your user inputs, right? So describe is the role here. And then dynamic retrieve content. In our case, there will be nothing to retrieve. Detailed task instructions. So follow these guidelines. So when creating an itinerary, okay. Mm-hmm. In our case, this is not dynamic retrieving content. No data here. Detailed task instructions. Okay. So in this case, your role as an expert in CSS, all right? You're an expert in CSS, all right? And when asking questions, you're an expert. You are a CSS worldwide expert, right? Expert. You're a CSS worldwide expert. Tasked with creating a personalized travel itinerary. Right? You are a CSS worldwide expert agent, you can say, yeah, agent to respond questions from exactly. You are a CSS worldwide expert agent to respond questions, questions in plural, exactly, from the user, right? In a very systematic way to help understand the true questions of the user. Okay, makes a lot of sense. So, is this one, right? Is this one. we're not going to pass any dynamic or retrieve content, not at all. But here we say detailed test instructions. So detailed test instructions. So you as an agent, okay, or when responding to when responding user inquires, just to get fancy here, inquires. When respondents to user inquires, I just want to get a little bit fancy here. Follow these guidelines. So follow this guidelines, right? Which is this systematic way of doing this. Research the location and the population attractions. Consider the user preference. Plan activity for each day, ensuring a good balance. But in this case, this is now describing is a detailed test instructions. All right. So in here, I can say is, well, let's use what we already have here. Percolation versus leaking. React event listener batching, my function declaration speech research. Is this one. Work through this step, right? Wait, what? What about my? Oh, there you got it. So follow this. Follow these guidelines. So work. All right. So one, work through this step by step. Okay. So one, understand what is the core question being asked. Second, analyze what is the key factor components involved. Third, reason. Analyze what logical connection can I make it. And synthesize how these elements combine, and then conclude. I want to put all of this in this way. And then now answer. All right. And then now answer. So repeat critical instruction, particularly useful for very long prompts. Okay. And now answer. So here we're describing is the role, right? Just this. Here we're describing is a text context, right? This is your task, okay? And I am not passing any dynamic data. Here you should maintain a friendly customer service tone or any tone. The tone is to me not relevant here, all right? But yes, this I'm describing is the task, not describing is the tone. I'm not passing any dynamic data, background data, the arguments of the image, not in this case. Detailed task descriptions and rules, yes I am describing is the details about this. When responding to user inquiries, follow these guidelines, work through this step by step, just understand yada yada and all that kind of stuff, right? You can provide now examples of this. In my case, not, this is optional. You can also provide the conversation history. I do not have any history. This is a new blank state. But if you want to now fit this with the conversation history, well, there you got it. Here's a conversation history between the user and you prior to a question. It could be empty if there is no history, right? Thinking step by step and take a deep breath here. which is what I'm actually describing is here. Work through this step by step, right? Part of the detailed task description, thinking step by step and take a deep breath. Think about your answer first before you respond. Work through this step by step and think about your answer before respond. So understand and all that kind of stuff, right? Output formatting in this case, nope. This is to create now. This is to create now is an agent of this. So far so good. It's like good, but in my case it's for CSS. So now answer. The core difference is that outline is the outline property. Okay. So no italic here. I don't know how to remove property. Doesn't affect layer. Property outline doesn't affect layer. Outline is like what is outline doesn't affect the layer. Why layout is not affected? Exactly. Why layout is not affected? Why it is affected? No. Why layout? Why layout? Layout. Okay. Why layout? Exactly. Why layout? Or why exactly? Why outline doesn't exactly doesn't why outline doesn't affect layout? You know, why outline doesn't affect the layout? The core question is why does CSS outline property not impact the document flow, layout flow, unlike other visual property like border? I didn't tell you anything about this. Example border. You get the idea. So analyze key factors involved layer versus visual layers. CSS distinguish between property that affect elements geometry and those that are purely visual. The box model. Border is part of the CSX box model. Outline is not. Rendering layers. Outlines are rendered in a separate visual layer after layout calculation and design purpose. Outlines were specifically designed for accessibility. Focus indicators without disrupting layout. And the reason the logical connections layout calculation happens first. Outline is applying post layout and no dimension impact. Since outline doesn't participate in the box model calculations, it can push other elements around. Infinite outline thickness. You could theoretically set 1000 pixels solid red and it wouldn't move a single other element because they don't participate in the layout, man. Okay, because since they don't participate in the layout in the box model, you can here specify, say, hey, 1000 pixels. All right, the style is the color, the style is the solid. All right. You have to say transparent, or you can say, hey, light blue. But it doesn't. Holy moly. But it doesn't. But it doesn't. Okay. But it doesn't. Exactly. But it doesn't. Uh, but it doesn't impact the box model. Interesting. It doesn't impact the box model. It doesn't impact the box model, the layout of that, because it's not included in the box model. Mhm. Therefore, but what you can see here is that, of course, it's applying is some sort of index here. Some sort of index here. Exactly. It's applying some sort of index here. Mm-hmm. But of course, it is overriding here. And in this case, it's because it will, okay, this particular element that is here, they are now being overridden. So they are now except the outline and the border. Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. Interesting. And that is happening because this is now part of this layout. So if you put, for example, this element outside here for a moment, it should be rendered. But as you can see, does not. Text rendering optimizing legibility. Mm-hmm. 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 But it doesn't include in the calculation here. So where I can look at that, you know, accessibility, focus indicator, outline, don't shift page content when they appear, performance, no layout, recalculation needed. When outline change, debugging, developers can add outlines to visual elements without breaking layouts and flexibility. But this is accessibility, it's focus indicators, outline, don't shift page content when they appear. And then you can apply that. So for example, in this particular way, right? So you can say things like this. You can apply is, for example, is this, what it is, I think it is. You can apply is this, all right? And say, well, apply this, but only on hover. And to apply only this, but only on hover. So emulate hover here. But only is emulate that on hover. I don't think you can actually pass that, but in any case, yeah, fourth element state, but it's in there. So, but in any case, that's what happened here, especially here as we explore about this padding and border. All right. So border is a bit different of padding, since the format looks like this, right? It's a bit different. It's a bit different in padding. It's a bit different from padding, since the format looks like this. Since the format looks like this, right? You get this. Since the format looks like this, and then became combined in a shortcut. Exactly. And they can be combined in a shortcut. Like this. Okay. So, and not only that, the only required fields in border width is the only required field is border style. And the only required field is border style. So without it, that one is going to render that. It's like one render. And render. Like no render. No rendering. Rendering. Like this. So on that, we also look at a couple examples here on how can we do this kind of stuff, so on and so forth, as a way to understand this. So a couple examples here. Then the other is the border radius, and the border radius here. Here on the border radius, okay. What he were describing is that how you can actually now this is interesting because his listing is a list of mistake from this. And they have made this CSS language, and one of these mistakes is listed here. So border radius should have been corner radius. Holy moly. With this italic here. But it is not hard to understand the rationality behind here. So we can show now is a particular code snippet, all right? And how you can actually take a look at those particular style. So for example, in this case, this. And now we get this. And then the difference between the border versus outline. And part of the border playground, I really love about this. The border playground. where here we can actually try to mimic that or not. Right. And the border playground here. All right. To show is at least how that will look like. And then the difference between now the border versus outline. Outline, unlike border, is not part of the box model. Therefore, it doesn't affect the layout, but it is used as part of the accessibility. For example, in focusing input elements. All right, in focusing input elements here. So for example, like that. So outline will follow is a curve with the border, and there's a couple is TD bits. Outline and have a special offline set property. It allows you to add a bit of gap between the elements and it is outlined. One more thing, outline are sometimes used to focus indicators for folks who use a keyboard or other non-pointer devices to navigate. And we'll learn that in the next one, which is little big details. Focus visibility here. But that's quite interesting. It's because they don't participate, because this is not part of the box model. All right, now it doesn't affect that. Now it doesn't affect that. Okay, makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. Now let's take a look at the margin here. Okay, let's take a look now at the margin. So finally, the third in our trinity, margin. Margin increases the space around an element, giving it some breathing room. As we saw earlier, margin is a personal space. In some ways, margin is the most amorphous mystery. It can do wacky things like pull an element outside of the parent or center itself within its containers. And let's see if we can shed some light on this wildly property. Exactly, it's like can center itself within its containers. Syntax. So the syntax for margins looks an awful lot like pattern, like this, right? And also you can apply is this particularly syntax from logical properties in the box model. Okay. So we'll learn about shorthand properties a couple lessons back. So we won't revisit them here. Pop back if you need a refresher. Exactly. So this is something that we talk about, that shorthand property and quite familiar with. Negative margins with padding and border, only positive number including zeros are supported. With margins, however, we can drop into the negative, and a negative margin can pull an element outside it is padded. Okay. Exactly. And negative margins can also pull an element sibling closer. Interesting, right? The pink box has a negative bottom margin. In this case, this margin bottom, known as pink box, has a negative margin bottom. Okay. Uh, yes, a negative margin bottom of 32 pixels. All right. Whereas the neighbor is have a margin left of the 60. So this neighbor, all right, has a margin left into the 60. We can also use this instead of left, say, hey, margin inline star, like this, and this will work as expected, right? But I do want is to starting to get myself familiar with this, because this is something that we're going to start to using as part of the internationalization and so on and so forth. Okay, and the world is going to move toward that direction and deal with it. And here we say, hey, we're now pushing these elements uh, right next to this, okay, which is the pink box here. What we're saying is margin bottom, and the way how this computing is in this way, all right, where it say, hey, I'm going to now put this element here. This is part of the style. The main is at 200 pixels, and it's actually, I'm assuming here is defining it that way, but there's some other things that are omitted. There are, of course, there are other stuff omitted here, as you can see here. Okay. Interesting, right? Let me actually sit myself. I want to take a sit. And we're back. All right. Mm. All right. So, the flow layout, margin collapse, and this one. Okay. So yeah, this has negative margin. So we're essentially saying is that I want to render is this, removing all of this. You know, it's gonna comment this out. You know, it's going to render all of these elements as it is. You know, and because it's rendering all of those elements, okay. So big box bottom is say margin minus 32 pixels. All right. So the margin bottom will have is margin minus 32 pixels, and the neighbor is gonna move from left, from inline star 16 pixels. However, it's easy to fall in the trap of thinking that margin is exclusively about changing the select element position, where it's not. Really, though, it is about changing the gap between elements. Now we're talking about. So really is though it's about changing the gap between elements. But if we do this, right? This is margin bottom here. It's removing is the gap between elements. So if you say this, it will of course put that in that way. But if you for some reason it's like you are it's like you are changing the gap between elements. The space between elements is that what you are modifying here. And that's and that's vastly counterintuitive, because at the end of the day, holy fuck, because what you're saying here, because margin belongs to the box model, so it counts in the computation of the dimension of that box. It turns out that here we are saying, hey, this particular box, all right, let me see if I can put the exact. So this particular box, the contents will be whatever, right? I think that it put some style here, is the main box, exactly. Some box is like 50%, 50%, all right, white, right? So pink box, and the neighbor, right? It's interesting that neighbor is like the same. Okay. So it says that the content of this will be 50-50% to be equal respect to the pairing elements, all right? So the pairing element is this, and if for some reason we say something like this, all right, they're gonna be now half of this element, all right? So it's gonna count from that. Quite interesting. So if you say, for example, 25 and 25, it makes a quarter of the entire width and height of these elements. Makes sense. And here you're saying is this will be the half of that. So for the sake of the example, I want to say to remain things like that. All right. And then we're saying is that the content is this 50% of the property that we inherited from the parent, in this case, okay? And so this is the box. We are inheriting is the property height and width. We are saying that I want to take is the 50% of that, which is the half of this, in its width and in its height, okay? And then this is to calculate is the width and height. So here we are using is what I'm assuming that is using is the border border sizing or box sizing is border. So box sizing, okay. So box sizing is border. Okay, quite silly of me. So box sizing is border box, which is part of the box model, all right? So this is box sizing. And when it comes to describe the in this case is the several layers around the content, okay? The content, the padding, and the border, all of them are part of the width and the height, which is great. But the margin here, this gap, we can think of this as the gap between elements here. So this gap now as you can see here in this small box, it say, hey, this is the box, all right? And if for some reason I say, hey, the margin bottom is now negative, all right? So you can think of this gap across different elements that is shrinking or overlapping here. But again, they remain on the same. So if you, for example, do something like this, index like 1, all right, index dot 1, or index dot 1000, pink box X, yes. Interesting. That's interesting. So you can is overlap this, all right? So no matter how much is this index, it seems that they belong to the same as it is. You can say C index is belong that they belong is to the same here. So here, that intuition that you have doesn't work here. Okay, so it's not true. Good. So you can think of margin as that, man, as the gap of between elements. Negative margin shrinks the gap below an element, causing the next element to scoot up closer. Finally, negative margin can affect the position of all siblings. When we apply negative margin to the first box. So of course you are lifting all of this. So it's now lifting all of this, and in this case, the interesting thing is those two black boxes, they follow the deep pink box. When we use margin to tweak an element's position, we might also be tweaking every subsequent element as well. Every subsequent element, and also is if you define, so for example, some other boxes here, all right? Say a box inside of this, and a box in this, box in this. Every subsequent element, interesting. Holy moly, bro. So every subsequent element here. Exactly. So if you say, for example, is this, so you are now is impacting, so the margin, so when we use margin to tweak elements position, we might also be tweaking every subsequent element as well, causing them to recompute them, or to recalculate that. This is different from other method of shifting an element's position, like using transform translate, which will be covered later. If you're keen to learn about the intricacies of negative margin, check out this in-depth article in here by Peter Paul Coach. Oh, here we are. Politics in mobile. What? Dutch politics, but a primer for Forge. Oh, holy hell. Who the fuck are you? I mean, sorry, it's like Mark Teal. Follow on Mastodon thing. More serious letter that regulatory hit my inbox. Design review, CSS weekly. Back from Portugal. Holy moly. They drove back through the coast? God damn. Yeah, but I do want to look is Add that. Everything on this site is written and maintained by me, Mark Teal. You can find me on Mastodon, Blue Sky, Vero, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, holy fuck, and many more of this clock. I track my runs and write my Strava. Strava. What the French toast is a Strava? Oh my god. I get it. I laugh because this is first world problems, bro. This is first world problem. There's nothing wrong with that. The first number app for runners or cyclists. Oh my god, I get it. I French those get. I French those get it, bro. Mark Teal, 17 kilometers. Holy moly! This is where we are heading to. Oh, crap. This is what Argentina is gonna head to. Oh, Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires. I don't know if Argentina, but I do think it's Buenos Aires. Holy French toast. Mm. With Komoot. Komoot. Who is Komoot? What is Komoot? Uh, oh, it's another app? What the French stuff is this? It's all of made of. Holy French toast, bro. Holy French toast, bro. Is that shit keep tracking of all of that? Oh my god. I don't think that you shouldn't. Anyway, this site is running on Kirby. Kirby is the CMS that adapts to you. Oh, okay. Content, and then you got all of this. PHP 8 plus Vue. For developers, for designers, creators, and clients. Trust by clients worldwide. Philips, Novartis, Harvard, Techibo, the Arsenal, Munich, Red Bull, Makita. That's interesting. Key CDN with support of Key CDN and Algolia, made in Europe. The CMS that adapts to any projects made for developers, designers, creators, and clients. But it's another CMS. Is that your company, your product, your magazine, your writing, your project, your microsite, and your ideas. Made with Kirby. Off-screen, Pafatalier. On search Rust. Okay, space. Find spirit. This is more like exactly for magazines and stuff like that. Okay. Exactly, so for magazines. Extinct and endangered. Insects in peril. View the gallery and watch the. Oh, this is ugly. That view gallery. Blue Calamity B. Exactly, but you do need is that Lady Beetle, Hawaiian hammerhead fruit fly, Cuddle Pink Sand Dunes Tiger Bear. That's beautiful. That's a beautiful illustration from here in Extinct and Explore. Exactly, it's now rendering is that image, which is a huge image. Exactly. That's the idea. To show this image properly here. Holy fuck. To show those image properly. That's good. That's great. That's great. This is now basic stuff, right? It's not that hard. Head.js, light speed. There you got it. So you get the idea. Okay, but this is exactly. It's more like for magazines. Mm-hmm. And there is a lot of that, bro. Put a talent agency. Exactly, but there is a lot of that. And trust by clients worldwide. So Lufthansa, Bahamas, Mercedes-Benz, McDonald's, Aerowings, Philips, Makita, Charity, and there you got it. Ah, this is Kirby. This is another CMS, but and fast motor foundation that scale with your projects and always have you covered. Use our powerful plugin API and the sky's the limit. It's PHP plus Vue. Okay, okay. And it is hosted by Host Europe. Host Europe. Oh, it's a data server. Good, 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 good. So you can stay up to date with this RS feed. Contact me via mail, or there you go. But it doesn't have any Twitter account. It's interesting that he whole is that. Mm-hmm. Founder and beyond Teleran, co-founder of a Smashing Conference, hobby photographer and coffee addict. Teleran. Okay, Teleran. In the Smashing Conference. Oh, Smashing Conference. Oh, that's okay. All right. Smashing Conference. Okay, that's interesting. Very, very interesting. Exactly. So all of these events are just job and hiring opportunities. Diverse and safe space. Here we go. Inclusive and accessible space. Challenge and fun side events. Lightning tags by attendees. Truly smashing time with people who cares about their craft. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But that's what this event is all about. It's just for job opportunities. It's a way to connect. It's a way to connect is now talent with clients, employees, and so forth, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. But I do think this kind of things will now be is okay, okay. Exactly, part of his website. Oh, but interesting, interesting, interesting. Interesting that he mentioned about that. Since 2010, I run Beyond Teleran, an event for the web community. I do this full time as a one man band ever since I started, and I love it. Beyond Teleran. Hello, you are here quite late. Beyond Teleran is the affordable single tracking worker. Okay, the magic of Beyond Teleran is the people. When so many creative and passionate individuals come together, incredibly this happens. I walk away feeling inspired, motivated, and grateful to have joined such a wonderful community. Events is here. Oh, but this is kind of the events here. Oh, it makes a lot of sense. Okay. Advanced design tokens. Oh, upcoming workshop. Advanced design token. Mm-hmm. And consultant who love to help level up developers. I am also in Brand's younger brother. Oh, Ian, okay, it's Brand Johnson, younger brother. He has been developing design system along Brad since 2015. Over the years, he built design system in many technology, web component, React, Angular, Vue, and others. Ian partnered with teach leads, developers, and designers from dozens of organizations to help them successfully establish, implement, and maintain sturdy design system and token architecture. This work is equal part art and science, and he always excited to share his hard-earned lessons to make your life easier. Before Ian's life as a web designer, he used to be a professional meteorologist. When he's not professional meteorologist, what in the f? That's interesting. Go or forecasting for snow, and you can find him playing music, doing sports, and spending time with his wife and son. Meteorologist. What? Okay. So is this? Interesting. The two lines above the photo pretty much describe what I do and enjoy no parts from being with my wonderful family, but maybe I have no idea why. You are interested in my background. The C64, BS graphic, demo parties, and all of it. I really never was interested in computers. Okay, games like Sid Meier's Defender of the Crown. Okay, this is how he get into this. Flash forward in Amsterdam and attending, and I suddenly felt like being home again. I meet chaps like Joshua Davids, Brendan Davis, James Patterson, and House Gifford. Beyond Teleran. During what I described, I was working as a freelancer web designer before I made this decision to stop all of this in 2011 and to start Beyond Teleran, an event series where designers, developers, and other creative minds meet and exchange to create an event with a wide mix of topics, not focusing on certain fields of business. And there are many fabulous events happening out there. The last edition just took place when writing this, and it was a blast. 500 people has been part of this. Over 190 people were on the waiting list for the drop up to get a chance of attending. The success amazed me equally as it makes me proud, but it also creates certain fear about this monster. I am growing, but hey, I'm also running in so much that I'm willing to fight my fears. In 2020, I add Stay Curious to Beyond Terrelman, a live online event series for curious minds. Stay curious. Okay, when the pandemic hits, this is another event here. hmm We don't record any of the online or hybrid cafe. Usually, the format is simple. In each show, we invite interesting guests who will present a short talk followed by a conversation in a friendly and cozy atmosphere. So they don't record that? Uh, mm, okay, video is private. Okay. hmm That's interesting. Okay. Ah, look at this. Jeremy Keith. Ah, okay. There's some people here that have a little bit of time working with this, like more than I have, more years that I have, not professionally, but alive. That make you something. Sci-fi has a lot of subgenre. Okay, where he makes website with the splendid design agency Clear Left. You may know him for such books as Down Scripting, Bulletproof Ajax, HTML5 for Web Design, and Resilient Web, and most recently Going Offline. And most recently Going Offline. And this is a particular book. Boldly take your website where it never go before offline. Introducing to service worker, preparing for offline, making fetch happen. Catch me if you can. Service worker strategy, refining your service worker, teeing up the offline user experience and the progressive web app. This is. Mm-hmm. Mm-mm-mm. Okay, man. Okay. All right. All right. Steph is an independent writing and research career. She's a senior research consulting with Healthily, a health startup based in London. Prior to that, she was a senior research on contract at a Google, working on their internal product suites that keeps Google service up to 99% uptime. She was the head of research at Clear Left, working with clients such as Spotify. In 20 years of working in the digital industry, Steph has worn many hats, including the product lead for a startup in the digital publishing and a director of technology at an agency and a digital agency in Montreal. She is also a regular speaker at conferences and guest lectures and all that kind of stuff. Okay. That's quite interesting. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So none of this are recorded. Kirby 5 and Kirby 4. But these are not released. Exactly. They are not public. That's interesting. Exactly. It's a file-based CMS. Uh-huh. Okay. Kirby. Exactly. So you got now Kirby, you got now is, but now this work with PHP, right? This actually work with PHP, which is why this actually has been more tremendous. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. All right. That was. I didn't know about this. It was quite interesting. Very, very interesting. Smashing conference after Vitaly Friedman spoke the first time here. Open Device Lab. Border.known. Border Known, a non-profit mini conference dedicated to find modern ways of thinking, design, and using an increasingly versatile mobile web. ODL ODL admin meetup. In the webcam. Oh, okay. I introduced something called side events for Beyond Terraland. The idea was to have satellite events during and around Beyond the Teleland and to use the opportunity of 500 people beyond in town for event anywhere. Some of these events are organized by other peoples, like Afternoon with Shopify and Friends, Kier with Let's Build, and Frank Lewer. Sometimes I feel a certain topic and is so important that I want to run an event and side event as well if nobody else does. That made me organizing a run in decentralized camp together with Bastian Algier in 2014. I really love about this. It's like it's so fucking simple, bro. It's like no, no, it's just like that. I mean, it's just notes, bro. It's just French toast notes, bro. It's just French toast notes, bro. Mm-hmm. Taking photos. Oh, and Flickr. With schoolmates Felix, Pete, Mark, and Christian. We have our first band. Founded the spoiler. The spoiler. Good. Good. A band called Spoiler. Okay. In August 2015, November, I am planning to simply run a blog about personal things, work related stuff, and everything that drives me and which I stumble upon. Articles and podcasts and interview. Okay, this okay. 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 Okay, this is a way of how you can keep track of all of this. Mm-hmm. Oh, this is part of this events here.
lassen und so weiter und so fort. Von daher kränkeln alle an denselben Dingen. Und daher
this is a
muss man, glaube ich,
Deutsch.
als Veranstalter aktuell, wenn man jetzt nicht kein Ding von der
Well,
Firma aus veranstaltet,
I don't know if this is Deutsch or German. I couldn't.
aber so Community-Events wie meine in der Größe von, keine Ahnung, 200 bis 500 Leuten, muss man halt einfach die Erwartungen ein bisschen zurück.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, man. Stay curious. Founder and host. Chairman of the supervisory board. Smashing media. Smashing conference. And all of this conference. Better by Design events. Co-founder and organizing. Open Device Lab. Düsseldorf. Founder. Flash Forum. Co-founder and admin. Interesting. Okay. Photo above from left to right. This is if you want to get if you want photos of him, okay. That's quite interesting. But yes, it's this one. Okay. Photo above shot by Andrew Brueggemann. Okay, photographers. In what? In Deutsch? No, this is like, I don't know, man. This is what I do. Okay. Wow, I don't even get it. This language. This is not even English. But in any case, this is the article. Photo by Mark Thiel. But this is photo by Mark Thiel. But it's, oh my god. Okay. But this is about him, about Quick Mode or and Peter Paul, coach. I organize CSS Day. Okay, this is CSS Day. The more I know about CSS, the more I realize I don't know. I'm not surprised. Okay, I get it, man. I get it. And performance.now. Okay. Which is another event. 2025 sponsors Google, SpeedCurve, Mozilla, Sentry, Framer, Catchpoint, Debugbeer, Uxify, Catch Meters, Bloomberg. Measure, Mark, and Entry. Is the 6th edition of Performance.now will take place in Amsterdam, a single-track conference covering today's most important web performance insights. Then you take a look at the web. Oh my god, we get into a quick rabbit hole previously with Krim Hotmer, but myself from 2025 on, I also spoke at many conferences and wrote a conference organizer handbook. I'm a freelance developer relationship manager for the Interledger Foundation, focusing on bringing web monetizations to web developers. I speak at your conference about web monetizations, and the ELF will pay for my flight and hotel. I am a freelancer since 2002, and you can hire me. In quick more, clients include Vodafone, Samsung, Intel, Akamai, a Dutch government, Google, Microsoft, Mozilla, and really early in my career I even wrote a few articles for a fruity browser vendors that I am not at liberty to name. Oh, okay. I am really early in my career. I even wrote a few articles for a fruity browser vendor that I am not in the liberty to name. This site, quirksmode.org, used to be MDN and Can I Use roll into one, and I maintain it by myself, mostly on pay, from 1999 for around 2014. My browser compatibility research formed a generation of web developers. Fun fact from Safari, released in 2003, the release of the iPhone in 2007, and Apple refers to my site to the documentation of JavaScript in Safari and other browsers. Holy hell. Oh, yes. I barely remember something like this. Exactly. The quirks mode. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, okay, before MDN. Exactly. But I think it threw that away. Exactly. It didn't follow that up. Okay, holy man, you have been quite busy. And I guess this is quite new. It's new events. Use this variable secretly. Holy fuck! This all of these people joins together, bro. Because I do find here.
Today's next talk will be from Leah Veru. Leah, someone that I
Exactly, Leah Veru. 6 years, 3 years. I have heard about, yeah, like 9 years ago, something like that, GS configs and so on and so forth. This was 3 years ago.
Leah Veru.
And like 2/3 of custom property uses were just declaring a property with a specific static value, like a depth of 0. And similarly, most custom properties were just declared on the root, essentially constants. You can now have reusable colors, you can now have reusable fonts, but like we don't really talk about how you can take advantage of the reactivity. In color for this component is declared 3 times away. Now place it every single time and just use actually our styling in such. So why is this happening? So this is happening because we haven't registered the property we're animating, so the browser's like, I don't know how to animate this, so I'm just going to flip at halfway through from one value to the other, because I don't know how to.
Okay, this is people that are deeply into the CSS
have a document
world.
called guidelines.
Exactly. This is people that are deeply into the CSS stuff and holy moly.
But like, look, size. Why would a size be? Why would size be an attribute? Why would outline be an attribute? Whether I want the button to be outlined or flat is an attribute. Why would pill be an attribute? I mean, these are very smart developers. It's not that they don't. It's not that they don't know that these should be presentational. It's that they cannot do it. Like right now, we cannot have conditionals that say, if the custom properties value is small, apply these rules. If it's medium, apply these rules, and so on. Like, and we would just have, we would basically, as you can see, the button that has this, but it's. First, I'm gonna copy.
Yeah. But
this,
I do.
the linear gradient.
I
So
do understand
right now,
what is this now. Okay. Makes a lot of sense. CSS Kevin Powell, exactly, is another one over engineering your CSS.
Let's get started with our first.
Right.
And I'm also really excited to tell you why I think you should start over-engineering your CSS. I know I don't have to tell that to everybody. We saw some people yesterday that were doing some pretty cool stuff, sometimes in more practical ways as well. You know, if you're using trigonometry to get a color palette, you're sort of pushing things a little bit.
Trigonometry. Okay.
But it's really cool that we're seeing people do that. So for anyone who's already doing this, I guess this is a story of why you can just keep on over-engineering your CSS. Before I get into it, just
So well, okay. This is Kevin Powell. Yep, this is Kevin Powell here, and this is the event here. This is the particular event here. Okay, this is the particular event here. Okay, this is something somewhat Yeah, an event that is quite. Most systems are about 45 minutes each, include a QA session with the speaker. We aims to cover technique that can stand the test of time, and we tend to stay away from hype. And we tend to stay away from hype. All conference video will be released after a conference on a weekly basis. Early adopter channel member can get early access to see some videos. Remote participant member can also watch live stream during our conference, and so on and so forth. Amsterdam. Peter Paul coach organized. Okay. Phone gap in that moment. Mobilism. Design day. Was the other partner in Web Conference Amsterdam from 2010 to 2014. At the end of 2024, and also he will likely to continue to visit the conference, he's no longer involved in the organization. WAC is supported by Alien Stack. I began the business in 2010. Oh, okay, but again, this is from Peter Paul, right? This is from Peter Paul coach, like so. Don't you have? Yeah, it's just Mastodon. People in Europe living like that kind of bubble. It is Mastodon here. Front-end social. In November 4, 2022, right? History.gig, former latter Roman Empire specialist, native of Amsterdam. Exactly. Works absolutely fine. Okay. It's okay, Mr. Paul Peter Paul Coach. A web developer, browser research, and a conference organizing in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. I organize CSS Day, Performance Now, and previously with Cream Home, but by myself from 2025 on. I also spoke at many conferences and wrote at a conference organizing handbook in 2010. I'm a freelancer, exactly. It's monetizing that. He's a freelancer since 2002. That's right. And the site, this site quirkmode.org used to be MDN and kind of use log into one, and I maintain it by myself, mostly pay until 2014. My browser compatibility research formed a generation of web developers. Fun fact, from Safari's release in 2023 to the release of the iPhone in 2027, Apple refers to my site to the documentation of JavaScript in Safari and other browsers. I ceased working on this site because it was mostly on pay and I was getting burned out after 15 years. Of course, man. This is why I am so taken with web monetization. You know? Web monetization. The web monetization API allows websites to automatically and passively receive payment from web monetizations, enable visitors. Interledger wallet, Chimone in GitHub, web monetization, Astro monetization, React monetization, helpers and hooks to speed up your integration with web monetization APIs. Oh, okay. Web monetization playground, link tag generation, probabilistic ref share generator, the contributor. That's why I am so taken with web monetization. If it had existed back in 2010 to give me a small but consistent monthly income, I will likely have continued my work here. I want the next quirksmode.org to have decent funding options. I wrote PPK on JavaScript 2007 and the mobile web handbook in 2014. In addition to my blog, I have written for Elisa Par, Digital Webs magazine, Smashing magazines, and few articles for Samsung Internet. I founded Frontiers, the Dutch Association of Frontend Professionals, in 2007, and it is eponymous Frontier Conference in 2008. Get in touch. Okay. Okay. So here is hidden JavaScript archives, statement function, string, boolean logic, and all of this. Boom. Browser object model. Oh, that's interesting. Pop-ups, browser, but I do think that this is quite outdated. Yeah, this is quite outdated. Yeah, I don't think this is quite updated. Exactly. Particle first new writer 2006. But exactly, that was in 2006, and is again the foundation hasn't changed, but has been updated, man. Introduction to events, the events, early event handler, traditional model, events models, event accessing, event property, event order, most events. Okay, the DOM. CSS modification and data retrieval. But you mentioned again, this is it is a shame that yeah, it is a shame. It is a shame that you haven't quite dedicated much more time to this. I'm writing a CSS book. Talking about CSS. Talking about layout. Talking about CSS. Here I keep track of the progress of my CSS book. Publication date as yet TBD, probably in 2024. Estimate length 142 words. Preliminary table of content. Rough draft. Draft 1. And unwritten. Canvas and viewport. And miscellaneous here. Table content, context, selectors, values and cascade, canvas and viewport, layout, flow the blocks model, overview, grid, flexbox, and part 4 miscellaneous. Styling from form fields, basic of transition and animations, background, and grading, the JavaScript CSS object models, and rest to be determined. Oh, this is quite interesting. Okay. All right. Okay. So here we are is on this topic, and it is all about is by exploring the intrinsic nature. The intrinsic nature of that. The intrinsic nature of this negative margin. Okay, and the intrinsic nature of the box model. All right, the intrinsic nature of the box model, and how this is now a series of layers that wraps around the content, and when it comes to this define is the dimensions of this box, which is the way how CSS look at the look at any of these HTML tags as a box to be rendered on the screen by the browser. Is it follow is this anatomy. right? So you have all of these several layers around the content. So here we look at the padding and how the padding is, which is this fluffy way, or this fluffy content that allows to do, for example, is now add some space around the content, and how we can use how can we use a specific properties on paddings. So for example is the pixels, the root m's, and even percentage, and why we don't go with percentage, okay? And also is look at the shorthand properties here, all right, which is the way of how can we use this trick, or this way of defining this in JavaScript, right? So because at the end of the day, right, we all do want in padding is look at how can also use is the logical properties. So rather than the position is to now calculate based on the way of how the based on how the flow, how the content is read, okay? We also look at the border and how the border describe is a different setup like the padding, but this is just to add some border to the content around the padding. How this actually impact is on how this gonna look like, aka the layout, and how, because here we look at the specific syntax to do, and also is so not only the syntax and how can you use, as well as other additional properties like border radius, and how we can compare that in contrast with the outline. So you have outline in border, and outline doesn't affect the layout, all right, because it's not part of the box model. And there is a very interesting question here. If this is not part of the box model, how in the F is this rendering? Is this affecting, right? Which is something that we're gonna see that later on. But the other element in the box is the margin, and how in the margins, all right, we can now not only affect is the current element, we can think of the elements. So we look at the margin, all right, which is this personal space, but margin in some ways is the most amorphous and mysterious, and it can do wacky things like pull an element outside of a parent or center it itself within its containers. So by looking at the syntax, how can we define this pretty much like a padding, right? And also the shorthands, okay, as well as the logical properties. We can also use margin with negative margin, which is we can think of this margin as now as the gap between elements. So as the gap between elements, so causing one elements to overlap or finally affect the position of all the siblings here when we apply negative margins to the first boss in a series. So that makes a lot of sense. It is affecting is all of these elements, all of the siblings, as well as the nested elements. So the interesting thing is those two black boxes, they follow the deep pink box up. When we use margin to tweak an element position, we might also tweak in every subsequent element as well. This is different from other method of shifting an element's position like using transform and translate. But this is exactly when you are modifying is the margin of this element, you are also going to do that for the nested elements, or the subsequent element as well. If you are keen to learn more about the intricacies of negative margins, check this out. So this is an in-depth article. Negative margin top and bottom, and margin collapsing, and negative margin left and right. And so for example is this. So with outer and negative margin right. Now let's change the behavior of negative margin. Let's talk about outer margins. Margin have one of the trick up their sleeve. They can be used to center a child in a container. Watch what happens when we set an element's left and right margin to outer. So I want to make, so what, by applying here, you are saying is, but is the content here. Exactly. So when you tell now here of this, margin left and margin right outer, okay, is a way of how you can actually is now center that element. So despite that you put these elements like 25, which is of course a more shrink width. No, doesn't work. What about this one? Alright, no, it doesn't work. Interesting. Doesn't work? Really? No, I don't think it's like even. No, you're not even rendering this. No, I don't think you're even rendering this. Exactly, now it's working. Exactly. So here you're saying is, hey, the width, which means is the border, padding, and content, it'll be now 50%, or it'll be now 20%, or 25%. All right. So what left is the margin. Okay. So when we are doing this kind of stuff, we're saying is the width, which is based on the box sizing in this case, it'll be now a quarter of the entire width of this. And then I want to now, here is make the margin auto and make the left auto, say something like this, right? Margin left auto is like taking all of this. Okay, it's like specifying is to take all the available space in that. And similar to the margin rights, if we inspect the elements here, we see the browser has applied equal amount of margin either side of the element. The outer value seeks to fill the maximum available space. Exactly, because that's exactly what it's doing. This is about filling the maximum available space here, or in the right, right? It works the same way for the width property, as we'll discover shortly. So if we say, hey, take all the available space, available makes a lot of sense. So now auto makes huge sense here. When we set both the left and rights to auto, we're telling them to each takes up as much space as possible. Like a game of hungry hypos, both sides try to gobble up all of the free space around the element. They are evenly matched though so neither side wins. They always end in a draw. If you take a free space around an element and distribute it evenly on both sides, you will end up centering the element. This is a happy byproduct of this mechanism. The only works for horizontal margins. Exactly, this only works for horizontal margin. is equivalent to set it to 0 pixels. It only works on elements with an explicit width. Block elements will naturally grow to fill the available horizontal space, so we need to give our elements a width in order to center it. Outdated? You may be wondering if this technique for centering is outdated. Now that we have more layered rendering modes like Flexbox and grids, the answer is no, but it's a bit nuanced here. Flexbox and grid are both powerful tools to managing layout, and we'll learn all about them soon. These properties are applied to a container and affect all the children's. The nice things about the auto margin trick is that it can be selectively applied to a single child in a container. So for example, let's say we're building a blog. Our article has a bunch of headings and paragraph and image, and we want them to be laid out normally, but we want to pull quotes to be centered. We could apply Flexbox or grids to the parent, but we have it affecting all of the other stuff in the container. There's some crafty way we could work around with grid. Full bleed layout using CSS and grid. The header, the nav, the content, and the ads and the footer. Research has shown that the ideal line length is about 65 characters. Anywhere between 45 and 85 is generally seen as unacceptable. In the context of a Roman alphabet, reading is a complex process, and we should strive to make it easy as possible. Oh, okay. In the case of Romans here. Okay, this is now, okay, this is for web designers. Okay. 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 And we should strive to make it easy as possible. The standard solution to this problem is to create a single fixed width column in the center of the page. And you have seen this layout everywhere. Online magazines, documentation, news sites, and blogs. You're looking at right now on their sites, which is the content, and then you have now is some ads, some navigation here. They don't have any navigation here, but you have is the header and the footer. So for example here, the constraint width column, the flexible column, and the flexible column. There are complicating factors, however. Not all content should be constrained, and we should allow image, video, and custom widgets to break free and fill the available width. This market uses an example of a child that breaks free of constraint, both photo by St. Paul Keener, and the common term for this kind of thing is full bleed. It is term borrowed from the publishing world. When something is printed full bleed, it extends to the very edge of the paper. This new requirement makes the problem considered more tricky. CSS doesn't really give us many options to have a child ignore its pattern width, and most of them have significant trade-offs. The solution is to say, let's start at the end with our solutions. You have the wrappers, when you say, hey, this block will now behave like a grid. This is the inner behaviors. And I want to now create this column, all right, where this will be the available space. The mean width will be is 42, or otherwise 100%, and one fraction here. So you are creating is now 3 columns here. Okay, 3 columns here. and all of those child elements you want to have is a grid of 2 columns. All right, that's interesting. So individually, each one of those elements will behave like a 2-column grid, 2-column grid, and 2-column grid. And then you say full bleed, where you say, hey, width is 100%, and the grid column will be 1/4. So the main, this is the grabber, some headings, some content, stuff like that. An image full bleed. Okay, so take all the available space and put it now into a 1/4 column. All cute market here, and there is a lot of unpack here. So if you're not familiar with CSS Grid, this might seem like a lot of random characters in keyword. Never fear, I all will explain. Exactly. So far is this. It's telling that. So no any issue with that. In early versions of this blog, I have a slightly different solution. Instead of using rem as our main unit for the column, I use CS. If you're not familiar with CH unit, it stands for character. Each character is the width of the 0 character for the current font. So setting 65 character is a way more specified that the column width should be equivalent to 65 characters. This is a wonderfully semantic and feels nicer than having to guesstimate the correct root element value for your font, but there were a couple issues with this approach. First, the width of 0 characters may or may not be average characters with your specific font, so I found I still have to adjust to actually win up to 65 characters line. But the bigger problem was this value is calculated using the current elements, font size. If you have a thick caption with smaller text and give it width 65, it will wind up being a different size. It was hard to keep everything perfectly aligned. C character is nifty unit, and it may serve you quite well on smaller project, but I find out one of being more trouble than it was worth for my blog. Assign children column. Exactly. So here you say, hey, all of this column, all right, in the CSS grid, columns are 1 index. So 2 is a reference of the middle column. The asterisk is a wildcard. It's match all the element type. We're saying that every child should be assigned to that second middle column. Each new child will create a new row like so. So each new child will create a new row like so. With 2 columns. Wildcard performance. Full bleed children. If you have now this class, I want you to get is the 100% of the pattern. I want you to take is the 100% of the patterns here. So this is how do we create this, right? So is this 3 columns. However, when we do this kind of stuff, we say, hey, grid each one of those elements, we define a 3-column grid, and now it's time to assign to its children. But when you do this, the grid column are 1 index, so 2 is a reference to the middle column. So 2 is a reference to the middle column. columns are one index. Oh, okay, they are indexed. Okay, now columns are one indexed. Okay, 1, 2, 3. So in the middle, okay, you are selecting is the middle. Okay, it's a reference of the middle column. Oh, this is how you can select some. Okay, okay, an index. Grid column 2. Okay, grid template columns and grid column 2. The asterisk is a wildcard and match all the element type. We're saying that every child should be assigned to that second. Every child should be assigned to that second column. Holy fuck. And we're saying that each new child will create a new row like so. And then you say, hey, whoever is going to use this rule, you essentially say, this will be now the 100% of the padding component, where the padding component is now who is the grid. And you're saying here, grid column, I want you to, since they are new, since this is how it is indexed, okay, it's a this special full bleed class allow a specific child to bust out of that column, all right, and span all columns from 1 to 4 is the start and the end syntax. Okay, so here you're saying is I want to all of these elements be placed in the middle. Okay, and then you say, hey, I want this elements grid column be placed from column 1 to all of this. And span all the way to the column 4 exclusive. And then you have now the grid columns. You may be wondering, our grid has 3 columns, so why we are referring is 1 and 4. In fact, grid columns are indexed by lines, not cells. Imagine drawing out 3 column grids, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and when we say that our fill bleed class should span from column 1 through 4, we are saying it should start right after the first line and right before the fourth one. In neither syntax. A reader pointed out, we can future-proof our code by changing the column assignment to this. By changing 4 to -1, we're counting from the end instead of the start. And we're saying that our grid should start after the first line and then before the last line. If you're familiar with JavaScript's line operator, it works in the similar fashion here. Grabs the last item, but this is like putting, this is like, hey, I want you to apply this rule for this reference here. The trick is that each child be counted its own grid row, and each child can fill as much as the row it wants. Most elements will only ever occupy the center column, but some will instead span all 3. Then you have the padding here. So on a smaller screen, on a smaller screen size, we want to add a bit of padding so that our text is seen right at the edge of this display. The simple solution to this is to add some horizontal padding to the grid container. What? Padding. On a smaller screen, we want to add a bit of padding so that our text is seen right at the edge of the display. And padding inline. So here we're saying is this, hey, I want this box to display as a grid, all right? And this is the template that it's gonna look like. So now I'm defining is 3 of them. I'm specifying is the minimum and the maximum space that it must take. Okay. And when you say one fraction, what one fractions means, bro? The first column is 1f, same as the last column. The FR unit is a flexible unit that fills available space. It is similar in the principle of flex growth. It is a ratio of how much the free space the column should consume. How much the free space the column should consume. Our center column is fixed with and is hypothetically example. But this is the first column is 1FR, same as the last column. The FR unit is a flexible unit that fills available space. So you're saying is that fill all the available space. It is similar in principle to flex growth. It is a ratio of how much the free space the column should consume. And then we have now the padding, right? Padding inline to describe that, hey, at the start and the end of that direction, the flow, the reading flow, I want to add now padding here. Nice and simple. In a previous version of this blog post, I solved this by using gap and add space better between columns. This requires reducing the width of our main column to compensate. I'll share that solution here as well. For the record, though honestly, I think padding is a better approach. Oh, this is another one. So you define as a custom property here that you later on can use that as it is, as a var. Though honestly, I think padding is a better approach. Because here you are now calculating is that you're saying, hey, you know what? Let me is determine is what is the 100%, and then you're going to read thus is from the left and from the right, and that'll be is the percentage that I want to take here. It's interesting that this is pixels, and somehow now calc say, hey, I don't care about which unit it is, I'll figure it out. CSS for JavaScript developers. Let me ask you a question. How comfortable do you feel with CSS? I know a lot of JavaScript developers who find CSS frustrating and excited in doesn't. They're proficient with the basic, but they can seem to develop mastery to be able to CSS. And this is a good opportunity for me to sell you the course. But that's great. Okay. Some readers have suggested that the same effect could be accomplished with the flexible or without the use of a wrapper at all. Unfortunately, there are some trade-offs that make those alternatives unworkable. It is beyond the scope of this article, but I wrote up a couple points in the Hacker News comment. The historical solution to this problem used negative margin. It works perfectly well, but it feels a bit hacky to me. You can read more about the CSS on CSS trick. Full width containers in limited width pattern. And this is in 2020 on full bleed layout using CSS grid. Okay, so he actually goes and wrote that. Okay, one more thing, don't be afraid to tweak the styles. Okay, One of the hits and one of the likes. Exactly. And they identify my browser who made that. That's interesting. Okay. Browser by category: CSS, animation, career, Next.js, SVG, React. In 2007. Holy yeah. What the French? I have worked in senior engineering position at organizations like Gatsby, acquired by Netlify. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. DigitalOcean and Khan Academy. I also taught web development fundamentals at Concordia University. This day I'm a solo indie hacker focused on empowering up and coming software developers. I'm 8080 zip tall. I am from Montreal, Canada, roughly 9,000 kilometers away from your current location. Well, oh, okay. My last name is Komiwa. Oh, Komo.
Como.
Komo. Ah, Komo. Josh Komo. Because it's French. Exactly. Josh Komo. I enjoy build cool, weird stuff with Go. A few years ago, I built a generative art machines. Thinking synth. Okay. Just looking the typography of this from that. And to stretching that. Let me say you have a lot of time, bro. let me tell you that you have a lot of time, bro. You have a lot of time, bro. You have a lot of time, bro. Yeah, you have a lot of time, bro. It's slope. That's interesting. That's interesting. And also create an explorable explanation about sound. The pudding. That's interesting. Frequency. Now sounds work. Okay, so he make now. Okay. The pudding. Okay, so he's exploring that. That's interesting. That's very, very, very interesting of your part. I am the author of several popular open source packages, including Use Sounds, a tool for playing sounds effects, and React Flip Move, an animation library. My package are downloaded 600 times per month, according to NPN. I spent 6 months unable to use a keyboard or mouse and learn to code by voice. Oh my god. Hand-free coding. Oh crap. How I develop software using dictation and eye tracking. Holy hell. No,
Slap second,
no,
go
no,
up.
no. I mean, this is this is something that is gonna push developers to the next frontier, which is the ability to describe is all of his ideas, unfortunately, through voice. And the more clarity you have in your idea, the more straightforward it'll be your words.
Styled button wrapper. Blank rule background color. Color variable primary. Slap. Blank rule font size. 2 red each made.
And this is great because it also informs you is to understand what you're going to describe to this.
Slap. Rule cursor pointer. Rule color white. Say return. Space.
Como mierda.
Say return.
Okay, return.
Space. Elm wrapper. Enter.
Elm wrapper.
Go up second and go left third. Brace.
Go out. Okay.
Brace space. Say children.
Brace space. Or curly bracket.
Go up second and go left third. Brace.
Go off left.
Elm wrapper. Enter. Go up second and go left third.
Go
Third.
upside.
Brace space. Say children.
Brace space. Save children.
Go down second. Brace say children.
Go down second.
Save. Go up second. Slap second, go up. Import component icon.
Import component icon.
Say icon, comma space.
Why he does that?
Closed Elm icon. Squiggly attribute icon. Say icon. Save.
This is mind blowing, bro. This is mind blowing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's great, bro. Exacto, me parece excelente porque uno. Hmm. Holy shit. Man, we are okay. 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 Oh, okay. 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 All right. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Holy moly, bro. Mm-hmm. Damn, so that was mind-bending stuff, bro. That was mind-bending stuff, bro. That was mind-bending stuff, bro.
They really need. They're more like owner operators. The way they increase their wealth is not by getting more equity. They just want to make the equity they have more valuable. And so I just would have felt icky about it. And I'm actually very proud of that decision. I sometimes wish that there were and maybe you can do this, Andrew, or maybe the Washington Post will do this, but somebody needs to make a list where they rank people by how much wealth they've created for other people. And so instead of the Forbes list that ranks you by your own wealth. So, Amazon's market cap is 2.3 trillion today. I own about, $200 billion-ish of it. So if you take 2.3 billion and subtract out the piece I kept for myself, then I've created something like 2.1 trillion of wealth for other people. That should put me pretty high on some kind of list. And that's a better list. How much wealth have you created for other people? People like Jensen at NVIDIA, he's going to be very high on that list. And that would be a pretty cool list. Somebody should do that list.
I think that is a very cool.
Oh my god. Anyway, but I do find that it was quite revealing, this, as well as the exercise thinking outside of the box. For example, here, in flow layout, elements are stacked into neatly into boxes. Things don't overlap by default. So sometimes, though, we want to pull something and let it outside its parent container for aesthetic effects. So your mission is, in this exercise, to reproduce the following effects. Well, if you want to do that, what we can say is to say, I want to target this particular element, all right? And then now, because the flow layout, as we're going to see that later on, is that all of these elements behave now in a block, one after the another, okay? Here what I can do is to target the H1 here, and then say, hey, I want to now apply the margin, okay? But because all of this element is how this element is the gap between this element, that's what margin is. We can do something like this, and therefore, we can do something like this, and therefore, all the sibling elements will follow up in this case, right? So if we say, for example, hey, let me reload this, and what about I say, hey, the margin bottom of this will be this one, negative. For some reason it doesn't do that. What if I do this? No, it's not. Okay, it's not working. No problem. So, what the phrase stuff is this? But for some reason, it has this one, right? And this is telling that the space between elements here is now on that way. But instead of doing this, we can say, hey, well, I can now is change the margin top, change to margin top, all right, and then now move these elements as it is. But the thing here is that once you move that element, all of the sibling will follow along. So this might not be what you want, all right? So this might be not what you want, all right? So what can we do here? Since we want us to replicate this, all right? I can say, well, I can be explicit about how this element, what is the gap between elements here? And the gap between the elements here, it'll be something like 24 pixels, right? 24 pixels, I'm gonna say 16 pixels. I do think that this might be 24 pixels, all right? And this is on the margin bottom. And then I want to specify on the margin, let me use now the new syntax, which is margin inline, and what do they call inline and block? You say block star, right? This will be now is negative, and I can say is minus 32 pixels, right? And now things started to change a little bit as expected. So we can say, hey, now we say 48, right? And now things are looking at this way. So of course, because at the end of the day, this is how we want to show. But in any case, it is something as this. So, but what happened is that if we, for example, is put in there as like this, we actually pushing is the content up to that, you know? And here we're not pushing is the content right down. But here how now the dimension here change of this H1 and 2 and also along the car, right? So the for example, if you say something like this, so look at now, it needs to, so the dimension of that particular box that wrap this H1 and the paragraph now changing is because of the gap between these two elements, of the gap between this H1 element, all right, and so on and so forth. So if we don't put that, so we have now this. But this is quite interesting because here is now telling that the way how you see this thing, the way how you see margin is like affecting the gap amount elements here.
Alrighty, so in this exercise, our mission is to reproduce the following effect.
Okay. The secret mechanism of CSS. Oh, that was 1 year ago. Web at Quebec.
Here's the scenario. I have an image, which is sitting inside a... And completely randomly, we have 6.286 pixels that is sitting underneath this image. It solves the problem. It seems totally arbitrary. Like, I don't know why line height 0 got rid of that weird space. And so, you know, for that first decade, this was my mindset. And so, working with CSS, you never get like a deep understanding of it. You have a really another word in this sentence, to body.
It's using now its own.
Also, and this was
it is now
mentioned
is
in the
using
introduction,
its own.
in 2020, I left my job
social
to pursue
media for
education
it, yeah?
online full-time. I created a course called CSS for
Funny
JavaScript
haircut.
developers. To date, I think something like 18,000 behave really differently. A perfect example of this is, and this is also something that makes CSS feel really inconsistent. I have this div class item, which is given a width of 2,000 pixels. And we see I have these two rectangles, which only does one thing. It sets display flex. Instead, then it does. And like technically we have limited vertical space too. Like our page is only so long, but we can have infinite pages. And so this is sort of the constraint, right? We have limited horizontal space, unlimited vertical space. And the layout is constructed up like 3 or 4 times in a big tube, and then you chop it into pieces, and you can... I built this little demo just to kind of allow us to play with some of these ideas. Do that in the primary axis, like taking this first or this second item and move it to the start. Well, I can't, because there's this other element there, right? It's sandwiched in between these other items. And so when we're each of the 4 items, like that's the axis needs to, and that the label should address. If I keep shrinking this, eventually we get to a point where the text in this container just can't shrink anymore, right? If I shrunk it more, the word address would overflow and it would be hiding either in front or behind the input, and Flexbox doesn't want things to overlap. So there's this minimum content size, which is based on the content. We can solve that problem by changing the min size. So I could say min width 120 pixels, right? Let's just say. And so we see that that works. Now we're telling Flexbox, hey, you can't shrink this thing below 120 pixels. And this doesn't quite look right, so maybe 110. But of course, the problem isn't shrinking because, and this is size for the input. And so we can fix that by setting min width 0. Now this is another one of these like special incantations that if you work with CSS, you probably memorized this. It's like, hey, if the thing isn't shrinking, throw min width 0 on it. Or at least this is, I should speak for myself. I shouldn't assume all of you do the same thing. But for myself, for a long time, this was just like, hey, if it's not doing what I want, try this, and maybe it'll solve your problem magically. When I do that, we notice that the input does actually shrink, because now the minimum size isn't 258, or whatever that number was. Positioned layout. So positioned layout is a little bit of layout modes, and then we're going to anchor it to something else. And the something else is what depends box on the parent, so both the label and the input are being laid out according to layout mode. So let's talk about that. Absolute positioning, I like to think of as like the magazine layout. Like it's useful when you want to do collages and sort of the kinds of layout you see in magazines where I have like an image that I want to sit in a very particular spot. I want it to sit above or behind other things, right? Positioned layout is all about like stack, refuses to do that. By doing position relative element on top of this, with this CSS, when I review code bases, I'd say like half of the Z-index usage I see doesn't even need to be there, because you can use this little tidbit. If I make the image 11, 11 is bigger than 10, so the image moves in front. If I set the H1 to 12, 12 is bigger than 11, right? It's the exact same property that works the exact same way, but there is no position property in sight, because the grid layout mode also implements Z-index. Flexbox does too, and I'm going to have to change the flex direction to column just so that they actually overlap. But yeah, in Flexbox 2, the Z-index property is implemented. So, good little thing to know. Let's look at an even more complicated situation. I have a header intended, this number, Z-index 1. What that means, so like this Z-index 999 is doing something. It's going to be smaller. Little thing to keep in mind. Now, I could keep going. Like, I have so many of these little things that I've learned about CSS. If you'd like to keep learning, I do have a course, as has been mentioned. It's called CSS for JavaScript Developers. Just to quickly talk about the format of the course, I built my own course platform so I can do things my own kind of way. So there's like written lessons that feel kind of like a blog post, but with interactive elements. There's a bunch of these short videos. There's even like some mini games, which is the fun thing about building your own course platform is you can build little puzzle games to help you make sense of CSS. If you're interested.
So he makes that. The case of whimsy, explorable explanation with React. And React Europe, 7 years ago.
Well, thank you. Hello, React Europe. All right. So I'm here to talk about how I wish the internet was more fun. And here I am.
That cut.
See a little bit, but
Funny cut, bro.
using my first computer.
Oh man, people will laugh. People will.
Go either way. I started
Exploring
using it
explanation
in
with
the 90s,
React.
And in the 90s, this is what a typical website looked like.
Okay. That's very interesting, man. Sir, I respect you. I respect you. We respect is the work. Definitely, we respect is the work. Useful tips: pleasant voice and funny haircut. Son of a bitch. Some random people on the internet. Okay. Okay. This is okay. Right now, I'm here. Yeah, I am here because I'm exploring. I'm here because I'm exploring. Yeah, I'm here because I am exploring the rendering logic. The rendering logic model in CSS for JavaScript developers. In taking notes out of it. was a year. And it was uploaded a year. And this is Josh Gomer. Oh, okay, so he has that. How to create sparkle 5 years ago.
So we want to make a sparkle in Figma. And to do that, we're going to start with the star tool. And just make it the same size.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. So let's take a look
We
at the
have
video.
a card with the heading is peeking up, but missing that effect. So we have a heading which is sitting inside of our card. If we pop over to HTML, we can see that indeed we have a heading and a paragraph. And our mission is just to increase the position of this pink heading to peek up over the top. So thankfully, we don't have to do too much. The solution can be done in a single declaration, but we do have to rely on our friend negative margin. So I'm going to say margin top, and I'm just going to pick kind of minus 16 pixels to get us kind of grounded. And when I do that, we'll notice that the space above here decreases because we've essentially offset what used to be a 0 margin to be a negative number, so it goes in the opposite direction. And what's kind of cool about this is it pulls up all of the children, right? So all of this text and everything, it changes position too, it gets pulled up. And now it's just a matter of figuring out what number to use. And if we look at kind of the numbers that are already used, everything is kind of a multiple of 8, right? 16, 24, 32. So, and also actually the padding of the card is 32. So we know that the default padding all around this is 32. So if I wanted it to be flush, I could change this to minus 32, and now it kind of just sits completely on the level there. And I mean, the smallest number I see is 16 pixels, so let's subtract another 16 pixels from it, so make it minus 48. And that looks pretty good, right? I think that if we compare the two, that seems to be the right solution. So there it is. That's all there is to it. It's just a matter of making sure to find the right number, and then remembering that negative margins can take something out of the parent container.
And a different playground. In this video above, I solved an exercise in a very different looking playground. This is because my playground component has evolved over the years. And this video was filmed using an early version. It looked like different cosmetically, but the contents remain the same. Sorry for any confusion. Stretch the content. Our .car element has served us well so far, but now we have a bit of a problem. Let's say we want to include a picture of an author, and we want to stretch out to fill the available container width. So image extends to the edge and text remains padded. The container padding is getting in our way, which is something that happens a lot. This is a very common use case. So the container padding is getting in our way. Update the code to allow for full with children. Feel free to modify the HTML in this one. This is in one of those challenges where you must not touch the markup. So what I'm saying here is that now I understand a particular trick here. But its understanding is that, okay, it's say, hey, I want to keep the padding here, okay. So one way to do is this. Hey, I want to make the car to remain and contains that padding, all right. But if inside of that car you have some sort of image, for example, you have something like this. So inside of that car you have some sort of image, for example, all right. I do want to is do the following. I want to take I want to inherit the width. No way. I want to inherit the width. Inherit. I don't think it will work. No, it won't. It crashed. All right, no problem. Exactly, this is one. So I do want to say, hey, if you have now any car here, or for any image that you might find here, okay, I want to inherit the width, would say, hey, it's gonna take all the available space there, which is something that we might not want to. We can say, hey, it's going to remain that. But the padding is in our way. So one way we can do is to say, hey, I want to define here. This is a particular project, the stretch content. So this couple exercise, thinking outside of the box, and the stretch content. So to do this, we say, hey, let's go to is notifies the car to act as a flex box, which means it's going to impact heavily on all of the elements. All right. And if you find yourself now an image, I want you to expand that as normally. So in other words, we can say something like this. We say display grid. All right, we want to display this as a grid. This grid, the grid template. I'm not sure what is the name of that property. Grid template. Okay. So this is grid template columns. All right, grid template columns. All right. I want to take all the available space, okay, which is only one. So only one column here. All right. And all right. I want to do something like this. So I can is adding just padding along the car. Indicate that all the columns we're defining is just one column. All right. Only one column here. And okay, so we're saying it's only one column here, all right? And if you for some reason detect this car, all right, since this will leave now is inside of a car, okay, and I want to be much more explicit about this because it actually it's a little bit more readable here. It say, hey, this, by the way, I don't want to display this as a block. In fact, I do want to display this as it is, but I want to make the grid columns that I think it is be from 1 up to the -1. So it takes all the available space, right? So in other words, if I'm doing this, so I'm telling that this is now a grid, which will behave in this way, all right? Yes, which will behave in this way. And because now this image is going to take now, okay, this is what I want to do, say grid column from 1 to 1, all right? Okay, so here we are. What happened here is that we are adding now the content to that, but to the entire car, all right? But in fact, I want us to add only to the look at that. It's no even to put it this way because you're gonna take all the available space. There is no even meaning to say this. It's gonna flow the normal flow of this context, all right? And what we can is say, hey, we can be explicit about the car. So we want the car show that, all right? But there are several ways of how we can solve it. We can say, hey, the padding will be applied for any of those elements. You can say something like this. The car I want to apply is that for any of those elements, which is padding like this, all right? Where any padding elements you want to apply this, might be a little bit quite expensive to apply that, or just simply say, hey, I want to apply now is only for any other element except this one, right? I want to apply this, but except for any other one. It's gonna take all the available space. Okay, that's what it's gonna do here. It's gonna take all the available space. If we do that, right? Even if we say something like here, but this only work is for margin. So margin outer here. But in our case, we want to apply this particular pattern. My intuition says that is applying all of those elements there. Okay. So my intuition will be is that, hey, I do want to have this as the basics. And if for some reason I want to apply some on any of this, I want to add the padding here. All right. And then if you find yourself with image here, I want to not have any padding, 0 pixel here, and the width will be now is 100%. Right? So please, I'm going to override the padding here. Okay. It's going to override the padding here. All right. And then now take that available space as it is. But this is us telling now to each one of those elements to apply this rule. All right. And then if you do have now an image as it is, hey, please stretch that out. So this way somehow we are maintaining is that, okay, but we need to maintain is not for all elements as we are applying here, okay, but only for this car, okay, but only for that car. Exactly, we do want to apply this, but only for this one. So this of course will not going to work. Margin, you can say minus 32 pixels, right? And try to stretch that image a little bit here to know and then try to stretch that image here. Okay. So based on all the things that we have learned so far, and how can we margin things and so on and so forth, we can safely apply this and say, hey, I want to apply now this to the inline. All right. What I can say is this on the bottom of the block. All right. But let me now handle this pattern in each individual elements. Might be one way to do that, might not. It's gonna depend. All right. You can say, hey, for any child element that you have, all right, I want you to now apply is a padding inline of 32 pixels, right? So far so good. But for these specific elements, I want to say, hey, padding inline of 0 pixels. So of course it's going to take all the available space here. This actually will works for all the nested object of this box has, all right? So the more elements that this box has, the more this rule will be applied to all of this So this might be one way to do that. All right. And also using all of his selectors and so on and so forth. So that'll work like a charm. Okay. And yeah, it's pretty much how we can solve this. Hey, I want to apply the car. All right. Dimensions here. For this content, I want to apply is from top and bottom, right? But for each one of those elements here, I want you to apply is this particular rules and then override these new rules for this specific element, which is an image. So makes sense. Let's see how it does.
All right, the last exercise in this series, stretched content. So the idea with this one is we have this card that we've been seeing before, still has some text in it, but now we've added a cute photo of an otter. And what we want is that this photo, and really any child that we choose, should be able to extend all the way to the edge of the card, while the other children, like the text, are still constrained by the padding. And one way to do this is just to remove the padding from the card, and to add padding to the paragraphs, right, all the things that we want. But that's kind of a pain, especially because one way to do this is just to remove the padding from the card and to add padding to the paragraphs, right, all the things that we want. But that's kind of a pain, especially because you imagine like a regular article, you might have a lot more paragraphs than images that you want to stretch. And really, it doesn't really jive with my mental model, which is the card has padding, but certain children are able to kind of break free of that. So if we look at what we have kind of to start with, we have another playground. And it has the photo of the otter already in it, but that photo is aligned within the text. It's not stretched. So I think what many people probably start with, what you think you need to do, is the same negative margin trick. So we have this image, and let's just say that we give it margin left minus 16 pixels, margin right minus 16 pixels, or actually 32 because that's what's on the card. And we've solved it for the left edge, but now the right edge of our card is even further away. And it's because we have this width 100% on the image. And images are weird. They're replaced elements. So the image itself isn't part of like the DOM. It's kind of a foreign object that we're embedding in the DOM. And if I don't give it a width, then the image takes up its natural size, which in this case is way too big for what we want. So how do we do this, right? For folks who have a little bit more experience, you might think to use calc, but there is a way for us to do this that doesn't involve any fancy tricks that we'll see later in the course. For now, the way to do it is to use a wrapping element, and it's really kind of a good idea anyway, because images being replaced elements, we don't really want to use them like for layout concerns like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap around this image. I'm going to give it a div, and I'm going to call it stretched out. And of course, you can name it something less silly if you prefer. And the idea is the container is going to do the stretching, and then our image is just going to fill that container. So now going back to the CSS, give us a new definition for this class, pull these styles out, right, the margin left and right, and then let's put our width 100% back on this. And that's our solution right there. The stretched out is now this reusable element too, right? And we don't really have another example here, but you can imagine if I wanted to, maybe I want this paragraph over here to do the same thing. I apologize for my lack of care for spacing. With these styles now, I've taken the second paragraph and kind of done the same thing. And granted, that doesn't look very good. We wouldn't really want to do that. But the point remains that if we had a video, if we had a little embedded widget, we'd be able to just wrap around this stretched out class and have that behavior wherever we need it. So that's the solution, right? Our stretched out class has that margin, which allows it to break free of the padding, and then our image just fills that available space. So our stretched out div occupies the full width.
So okay, so that's particularly one solution here. I glossed over the explanation pretty quickly in this video, so let me elaborate here. The default value of the width property is auto. By default, for most elements, this means automatically grows to fill as much space as possible. This is the problem. With outer has a different meaning for replace element. It doesn't mean stretch out and fill off the space. It means use your natural width. If you're still bit confused, don't worry. We'll cover all of this stuff in great depth shortly. And there's an entire lesson dedicated to width property coming up soon. Which is the width and the outer. But this is quite interesting because in our example, what happened is that we apply these particular rules to all of the elements. And this works, all right? But it involves now a little bit of effort to CSS to apply all of this. But in here, it say, hey, instead of doing that, okay, let's going to wrap this into an element where it says, hey, you know what? We want now is here. Okay, for real? Oh, that's interesting. We want now here is to to react. So stretch out, right? Stretch out the class, and instead of actually is going into each one of those elements and stretch that and apply that pattern to all of them, we want to keep that pattern to all of them. All right, we want to apply that pattern to all of them. And when you detect that element or that stretch out element, we're gonna say, hey, I do not want you I do want is to say, hey, image is something like this. It must be have width 100%. All right. So to take all the available space in that, and here we can say is, hey, margin inline star with minus 32 pixels. All right. A margin inline n with 32 pixels. All right. So if this doesn't work, what about is this? So margin left, this one, and margin right, this one, right? It's quite interesting. It seems that it's not applied, that element. I don't know why. I want to refresh this and apply this stretch out, right? This is the element that we want to apply here. We also can say, hey, please append this element. I do think I put that class name. Yes, I put that class name. That will happen. To React, my friend. Too much of React, right? We got this one, and now it is apply as expected, right? So the content. So now we are stretching. So this concept actually makes a lot of sense. We are now stretching that element. So now this image is going to be rendered in the entire width of that. So we can get fancy here and say, or get more international and say inline star, or just simple say this, simple say this, margin inlines in both of these ends, star and end, hey, a minus 32 pixels. Okay, so this is how can we now stretch elements here. Holy moly, bro. That is mind-bending stuff, bro. All right. All right. Holy moly. So that'll be all for this video. Take care. Bye-bye. Do, 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 do.